The great spy game between the CIA and the KGB was for global stakes. Throughout the Cold War, their agents did whatever it took to find out the enemy's secrets and uncover its plans.
The world of espionage is to go to somebody else's country and break their laws.
You always keep in the back of your mind, how can I use this person?
You're lying all the time. And a lot of people consider that a mark on your character.
When you lie, cheat, and steal, even for your country, it can take a toll.
What espionage is building personal friendships, really close human bonds, and then betraying that friendship when you get that person to do something that's in your country's interest and maybe not his or hers.
In the world of espionage, nothing is what it seems. An ally might turn out to be an adversary. The guy in the office up the hall, a double agent.
You're trying to get someone to betray. A trust. That's what it's all about.
The Russian contact was late, and the CIA man was getting impatient, nervous. One hour and 3 vodkas later, when the contact failed to show, he decided to make contact himself. He took his envelope into the bright spring afternoon and walked the few blocks to the Soviet embassy. For the KGB, it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. For the CIA, it started a 9-year nightmare. For Aldrich Ames, it was payday.
My intention was, it was a one-time sale to make a quick, illegal killing and stop. Only it didn't work out that way.
Ames was obviously a total disaster, and there's nothing good you can say about it.
He's a killer. Traitor, maybe. Traitor, yes, but he's a killer.
You saw what Ames did to the CIA. The result was an organization that's still reeling back.
Aldrich Ames' betrayal shattered the agency. It raised serious doubts about the CIA's competence and cast a shadow over its future.
What shocked me was that a spy for the Soviet and then Russian government could exist for a multi-year period, almost 10 years in this agency. Something was the matter here.
Aldrich Ames is more than just an officer gone bad. His case is a window into the world of espionage and into the CIA's unique culture. Though many think of CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia as Spy Central, ironically, Aldrich Ames was the first CIA officer who was actually spying while he worked there.
You're not a spy when you're working for the CIA. You're basically a spy hunter. You go out and find spies.
What we were in the Director of Operations were case officers or operations officers whose duty or requirement was to recruit spies, recruit agents, and then handle them.
The espionage business is a small part of the CIA's huge bureaucracy. Most of the agency's 20,000 employees work in administration, analysis, and technical services. Only a few thousand serve as espionage officers in the agency's Directorate of Operations.
We're watching to see what the Serbian President Milosevic's reaction will be to that.
The job of an espionage officer is to make foreigners betray their own countries, to commit treason.
The fundamental skill is to persuade someone to do something that may not be in his interest.
They use blackmail, ideology, flattery, and almost always money. These case officers may face grave danger. 59 have died in the line of duty. A more frequent hazard is getting lost in the labyrinth of deceit.
there is a well-deserved fear for everyone to say, the more I behave in this particular sphere of LCS, lying, cheating, and stealing, okay, the more I become like them.
Maybe, in a way, recruiting people and espionage can become addictive. You tend to carry some of the techniques over into your personal life. I mean, recruiting an agent can be like recruiting a girl for other purposes.
It was in this culture that Aldrich Ames was born and raised. Ames is a true son of the CIA. His father, a history professor, joined up in the early years. Carlton Ames's CIA career was undistinguished, marred by his drinking. Still, he passed on the anti-communist mission to his only son, Rick.
It was a crusade. He presented it as a crusade. I tended to, until a relatively advanced age, to agree with most of what my father had said and done, and so I was highly motivated.
Ames started his career in 1967. His first assignment overseas put him under the tutelage of Dewey Claridge, a skilled recruiter.
When you make recruitment, it's just like having an orgasm. When that guy says he'll do it. Just like having a sexual orgasm, no question about it.
Claridge supervised Ames in Ankara, Turkey, an east-west crossroads and a paradise for spies.
I had Ames in Ankara. I tried to get Ames to be a case officer. He couldn't be a case officer. He couldn't recruit his mother.
Unpromising as Ames' debut in Ankara was, the CIA rarely fired anybody. An angry ex-employee might compromise security. The agency preferred to handle personnel problems by keeping them out of sight.
I was the reviewing officer. And as reviewing officer, I made the dumbest statement I ever made, was this fella really ought to be in the counterintelligence business. Okay? Well, what I meant by that is that this guy has no interpersonal skills. And therefore, what he really ought to be is an analyst in the counterintelligence side of things, where you don't need interpersonal skills. And everybody in the agency or the DO would know that from what I wrote there. Okay? But on the surface, it looks really stupid. Huh?
Stung by Claridge's evaluation, Ames thought about quitting. Instead, he resurrected his career by studying Russian and then joining the agency's Soviet division in 1972. The division assigned Ames to the United Nations, where he sought recruits among the KGB officers working there under diplomatic cover. Jack Platt worked with Ames during this period in the late 70s.
When I met Rick Ames, I liked him because he liked operations. He'd done his homework. He spoke Russian. He'd studied the target. And I had a very successful operational relationship with him up in New York.
In 1978, Ames was commended for his debriefing of Arkady Shevchenko, the highest-ranking Soviet diplomat ever to defect to the U.S. It was the high point of Ames's career. In his personal life, though, he was floundering. His marriage was collapsing and he was drinking heavily. Once he left a briefcase full of top-secret documents on the New York City subway. Despite his unprofessional behavior, in 1983, Ames was promoted to a new job in a different area, Soviet Division Counterintelligence. His assignment, to search for spies working against the U.S. Janine Bruckner, one of the CIA's few ranking female officers, supervised Ames briefly in New York in 1984.
Ames came to work for me on a temporary assignment. He committed some security violations there, and I reported him and had him removed.
Bruckner reported Ames for using a top-secret CIA safe house for extramarital liaisons. But back at Langley, Bruckner's warnings fell on deaf ears.
After I reported him for security breaches, he continued to work in the most sensitive job that the agency had.
Though Ames's post as a counterintelligence chief gave him access to top secrets, it carried little real power or prestige within the agency. After 20 years on the job, Ames knew his career wasn't going much further. He began to see things a little differently.
Both the United States and the Soviet Union practice espionage on a mass, on a factory scale. Thousands and thousands of case officers with tens of thousands of agents collecting masses of information, which, frankly, was of very little use to anybody.
In a tiny office on the 4th floor, the CIA was breeding the most dangerous spy in its history. He wasn't a daring swashbuckler, but a faceless bureaucrat. His weapons, papers and files. His cover, a sprawling bureaucracy. Delving into the CIA's extensive files, Ames studied the history of espionage, all the while preparing to make some history of his own. The halls of the Central Intelligence Agency are tinged with paranoia. Penetration by an enemy spy like Ames is its greatest fear. From 1954 to 1974, the CIA trusted one man to protect its secrets. The legendary chief of counterintelligence, James Angleton. The imprint he left on the Brotherhood was enormous.
James Angleton was probably one of the more brilliant people that any of us will ever meet.
Born in Idaho, James Angleton was raised in England. In 1937, he came back to the States to attend Yale.
He was a poet. When he was at Yale, he published a poetry magazine. He was obviously an intellectual person.
Angleton joined the OSS straight out of the Ivy League. In Europe in World War II, he proved himself a skilled player of the espionage game.
He was a great guy, very odd in terms of comparing him to any other normal human being. He drank like a fish. He would stay up all hours of the day and night. Maybe a mad genius, but he was a genius in many ways. And people forget that he was paid to be the doubting Thomas of everything. And he was.
In the early years of the Cold War, the stakes were high, and effective espionage was vital. In the 30s and 40s, the KGB had recruited American and British scientists who'd given them the biggest prize of all, nuclear secrets.
The stunning news: Russia has the atom bomb, bursts on America.
This is where the role of the KGB can never be underestimated.
General Oleg Kalugin, the youngest KGB general ever, saw early on the significance of the KGB-CIA spy war.
Atomic espionage played a great role in bolstering Russian national security. And this is a fact.
The arrests of the atomic spies detonated a near panic. Throughout the 50s, Americans saw traitors everywhere. For Angleton, the traitors were profound and painful proof of the KGB's skill, cunning, and omnipotence.
He saw this and he saw plots. I don't mean in a crude way, because Jim didn't have a crude mind. But he saw plots. He saw pitfalls. He saw places where we'd been fooled in the past. And of course, if you mention Jim Angleton, you have to remember that he was very close to Kim Philby.
Kim Philby was a top British intelligence officer stationed in Washington in the early 1950s. He and Angleton were friends, drinking buddies who talked shop and shared secrets. Later, it was discovered Philby had been working for the Soviets since his university days.
Kim Philby, who I supervised in Moscow for many years, would chuckle over the fact that Angleton had been so intimate with a Soviet spy. I think this closeness and this final realization by Angleton that he dealt with a Soviet spy really changed his character.
That was a big shock to Jim. I don't think he ever got over it, because he and Kim Philby were close. And I suppose you're never the same after you're betrayed.
What is true? Whom do you believe? For Angleton, the answer increasingly became nothing and no one. His paranoia was dangerous at a time when understanding Soviet intentions was crucial to avoiding a nuclear holocaust. October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. It began when the Soviet attempt to build nuclear missile sites in Cuba was discovered by the CIA's U-2 spy plane. What helped end it was crucial information passed to the CIA by a Soviet double agent.
That was an intelligence coup, understanding whether the Soviets were really prepared to go to war or not. And we got that understanding from a human source called Colonel Oleg Penkovsky.
Penkovsky was a senior military intelligence officer, fed up with life in the Soviet Union. In 1960, he volunteered to spy for the West, providing invaluable intelligence about Soviet military capabilities.
It was the information that he supplied which made the president confident that the Soviets, Khrushchev, were not capable of carrying out whatever threats that they were making, and he was therefore able to solve the crisis reasonably.
Washington insiders called Penkovsky the spy who saved the world. Incredibly, James Angleton began to suspect he was a fake. In Angleton's mind, the KGB possessed an almost superhuman power. In 1961, he found a soulmate who confirmed his worst fears, Anatoly Golitsyn, a KGB defector. Golitsyn validated Angleton's theories that the Soviets had penetrated everywhere. Most important, he told Angleton that there was a mole in the heart of the CIA.
You say there's a mole? Yes. We know all about it in the KGB. Well, what's he like? Well, I don't know. I haven't seen his name or anything, but I think it begins with a K. And he was in Berlin, and he was doing technical work because he knew something about the bugging of the American embassy in Moscow. And he's of Slavic background. But here we were, bang, 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 bang. I was right in the middle of the crosshatch.
Carlo was a war hero in OSS days. He had been with the CIA from its beginning. The young technical expert thought he had a promising career ahead of him. But it was Carlo's misfortune that his name began with a K and he was of Slavic descent. Angleton's great mole hunt was on.
I was on ice for almost a year. And I didn't know why. Finally, I got a call to go over to the FBI and help them on a national security project of some high sensitivity. So I got over to the FBI in that old post office building in downtown Washington and walked in, and they read me my rights.
The FBI interrogated Carlo 6 hours a day for 5 days.
They said, there's a high-level penetration in the CIA, a mole, a spy. And we've got to find out who it is, and you're the principal suspect. Well, I was so relieved that it was something as preposterous as this, I laughed. And they said, what's funny? And I said, well, why in the world would I want to become a Russian spy? I have a comfortable life, I've got a nice family, I've got a wonderful wife, I've got good children, I've got enough means, I've got an instant career, or at least have had up to now. Why should I defect to the Russians? They looked at me seriously and said, you tell us.
Do you intend to answer truthfully each question?
Carlo was not the only suspect.
Yes.
Dozens of officers were interrogated, and their careers derailed. The CIA was eating its young. In 1964, the situation grew even more bizarre. Another KGB officer defected to the U.S., Lieutenant Colonel Yuri Nosenko. Nosenko, much higher ranking than Golitsyn, offered an insider's view of the KGB's upper echelons. Golitsyn, who was always looking for a way to promote his own importance, insisted the new defector was a fake. Angleton believed him.
I remember being called into my superior's office at one time and being told that Nosenko, that we thought was quite an acquisition, quite a boon to us, this defector, that he was considered to be sour, that he really wasn't a defector.
They thought he was a double, a plant of the KGB. Had they had an asset within the KGB, they would have certainly found out about it. This was a genuine case, but they did not know.
At Angleton's instigation, Nosenko was held in solitary confinement at a secret CIA base. For 3 years he was interrogated, drugged, and deprived of sleep in an effort to get him to confess he was still KGB. He never did. Back at Langley, a battle erupted over which defector to believe.
People took sides over this. Jim felt that the Soviets are too clever for us. They're sending these false defectors. Anything that they offer us, anything we touch is going to be bad. And he had immense influence in the agency.
Angleton believed that the KGB was orchestrating a worldwide, all-encompassing manipulation to undermine the West. He called it the Master Plan.
It presents to the West, by the various themes that it promulgates, what I call a wilderness of mirrors. They can have you believe whatever they desire you to believe.
He believed no one could see through the web of disinformation woven by the KGB. Angleton was so afraid the CIA would be tricked into recruiting KGB double agents that he essentially blocked the recruiting of any Soviet agents. All over the world, the CIA's espionage capability was gradually short-circuited. Stationed in Uruguay in the mid-60s, John Horton found his hands tied.
We had a Soviet embassy in Montevideo. We wanted to work against it, against the KGB and the GRU officers in that embassy. And we were discouraged from doing so. And we weren't told why. We were just told, leave it alone for the time being. This is very hard on operations.
The counterintelligence business lends itself to paranoia. And a certain amount of paranoia comes with the turf, and rightly so. But Angleton went way off the edge.
It developed into, for example, theories like the screen, i.e., the Russian intelligence service is so good, so all-knowing, that what it has managed to do is put a series of false recruitment opportunities out there for us guys in the CIA to snap up onto, and they're all double agents.
Jack Platt was a case officer in Vienna in the late 60s who found himself rendered ineffective.
Officers like me were told, you can try to recruit him if you want, but he's probably a screen. Okay? Don't waste your time. I said, well, what do we waste our time on then? Okay, yeah? You want to recruit bartenders, dancing girls? What? What the hell am I here for if it's all a screen?
Prague. It was here in 1968 that Jack Platt witnessed the real-life repercussions of Angleton's theories. The Czechoslovakian people rose up against the Soviet occupation, but after years of stymied recruitments, the CIA lacked the agents or the information to assess the intent of the protests, or what the Soviet response was likely to be. As a consequence, American leaders were stunned when the Red Army mercilessly crushed the reform movement. Congress later called the Prague Spring debacle one of the greatest intelligence failures of the decade. Despite his excesses, Angleton was a master of agency bureaucracy. He kept files on everyone and used them to consolidate his power. 6 CIA directors came and went, while the head of counterintelligence ruled unchallenged.
What Angleton lacked was adult supervision. No one was really supervising Angleton. And I feel that, that Dick Helms bears a lot of the responsibility for this.
Perhaps Angleton's search for a mole was somewhat excessive. The fact remains that counterespionage is a very important activity. It has to be ruthless. People are going to come under suspicion.
Always loyal to the Brotherhood, Helms protected Angleton throughout his tenure. But another friend of Helms, Peter Carlo, was not as fortunate. Carlo was forced out of the CIA. His 22 years of distinguished service ended under a cloud of accusations and suspicion.
I admit there were times when my vocabulary was extended thinking of Helms. I also remember the last time I saw him officially in the agency. I went into his office to say goodbye, and he said, well, Sergeyevich, sort of a pet name he had for me, which grew out of something. And I said, I think the humor in that name is sort of dissipated. He says, okay, Peter, he called me strangely. He said, Peter, I think you'll never know how valuable your service has been to the agency. And I said, that's right, Dick, I'll never know.
Angleton also pursued Soviet agents outside the CIA. Fearing that the KGB was behind the peace movement, Angleton's staff joined the FBI in spying on anti-war protesters. He oversaw another CIA-FBI operation that opened and read the mail of American citizens for many years.
What was your understanding of the legality of the covert mail operation?
That it was illegal.
What?
That it was illegal.
That it was
The
illegal?
press revelation that Angleton had spied on American citizens created a furor. He had compounded his problems by suggesting that William Colby, the agency's new director, was really a Soviet mole.
I'm afraid he stayed in the job too long, became overly suspicious of things, and my problem was that I thought that the major chore of the CIA was not to protect itself against the KGB, but to penetrate the Kremlin.
In 1974, Colby called the counterintelligence chief into his office and fired him. Angleton stood by the master plan, which by now his critics were deriding as the monster plot.
I have seen no change in the Soviets at any time.
After Angleton departed, the CIA eventually admitted it had wrongly accused Carlo and other loyal officers. Golitsyn was discredited. Nosenko accepted as a genuine defector. In his zeal to protect the agency, Angleton may have done more damage than any mole ever could.
I'm sorry to keep you out here.
Angleton never found his dreaded mole, but he left behind a CIA so determined to avoid another obsessive search that one could burrow unseen for years. In 1985, despite drinking binges and security violations, Aldrich Ames remained a counterintelligence chief in the Soviet division. The agency was consumed with Director William Casey's secret war in Central America. In the decade since Angleton's mole hunt, the CIA had let down its guard. Ames decided his time had come.
My growing disillusionment was a convenient cushion for me to use. It didn't have a great deal to do with motivating what I did. What I did was an act of personal desperation. It was self-perceived desperation, money.
Ames was deep in debt, paying for an expensive divorce and planning to get married again. His fiancée, Rosario Casas, came from a prominent Colombian family. Ames worried that his $60,000 a year salary couldn't buy a lifestyle that would satisfy his wife-to-be. Selling the CIA's secrets was his solution. His first sale netted him $50,000. Ames had the perfect cover. As a Soviet division officer, he was cleared to meet with Russians to try for new recruits.
I was telling myself there was no risk. You have to understand that. I mean, you don't, for $50,000 or $2 million, you don't commit suicide.
Before long, Ames began to worry. There were KGB officers out there on the CIA payroll. Any one of them could find out about him and expose him to the agency. To save his own skin, Ames decided to make a preemptive strike by exposing the Soviet agents before they exposed him. He assembled a 6-pound stack of top-secret documents describing all the CIA's Soviet operations, including full dossiers on the double agents who might be able to finger him. Stuffing the documents into his briefcase, he headed for the elevators.
I'd conceived of it like someone deciding to rob a bank or something, as a kind of a clever, illegal, desperate ploy, but one that was all kind of manipulable and containable. And having done it, it simply came crashing in on me that I was not in control. And that is what led me in this kind of sleepwalking state into in the end, sort of throwing up my hands and saying I have to go all the way.
He walked out the front door of Langley with a mother lode. Aldrich Ames had gone all the way. Over lunch with his Soviet contact, Ames passed a shopping bag under the table. For a promise of even more information, the KGB contact said he would make Ames the richest spy in history earmarking $2 million just for him. It was music to his ears. But a few months later, Ames received an ominous report. In Rome, a KGB colonel named Vitaly Yurchenko had walked into the CIA station and defected to the U.S. He was the highest-ranking officer ever to defect from the KGB, and he was ready to tell all.
I got a call to go up to our division's front office, and I did, and he showed me the cables, and as I started to read it, obviously I was astounded.
Ames understood all too well that Yurchenko might know he was working for the KGB. He would find out soon enough, because he and a colleague, Colin Thompson, were assigned to meet the defector at the airfield and debrief him.
Ames was late. He claimed he overslept. When I saw him later in the day, he looked awful. I mean, a typical person who had a really severe hangover. I think that night before Yurchenko's arrival was what really got to him. He's walking out there to Andrews Air Force Base, a military installation, where there are going to be a whole lot of FBI people who can arrest him. They have the power to do so. And he doesn't have a clue what Yurchenko really might have said about him, if anything. He didn't know. And so if that wasn't an occasion to have a few drinks, I don't know what one was.
Ames rode with Yurchenko to a Virginia safe house, not knowing if the debriefing he was about to conduct would reveal his very own treason. In the first few days, Yurchenko identified several Americans secretly working for the KGB. But he didn't mention a mole in the CIA itself. It looked like Ames was home free. The Yurchenko story had a bizarre ending. Hoping for some good publicity, Director Casey leaked Yurchenko's defection to the press. Yurchenko was furious.
It's a Saturday night, and I was literally closing the front door on the way out for a date that night when the phone rang. And I went back into my kitchen, picked up the phone, and this was the security guard. And he was in Georgetown, and Yurchenko just gotten up and left.
Yurchenko and a young agency security officer were out to dinner in Georgetown when the colonel said he was going out for air. He added, "Don't blame yourself if I don't come back." The officer explained later he didn't rush out with him because he didn't want to leave without paying the check.
Tyler.
2 days later, Yurchenko reappeared at the Soviet embassy in Washington. The defector was defecting back. He claimed he'd been kidnapped and brought against his will to the U.S.
Here I was kept in isolation and forced to take some drugs.
Yurchenko claimed the drugs had incapacitated him, that nothing he'd told the CIA was reliable.
Ask CIA officials what kind of secret information I gave them. It would be very interesting for me to know too, because I don't know.
The story saved face for the KGB. The CIA looked incompetent. The agency had lost a prize defector in a restaurant. Soon Yurchenko was on his way home to Moscow. As he walked toward the plane, a clue to a far greater disaster for the CIA could be glimpsed in his entourage. Carrying a congratulatory bouquet of flowers was a young KGB officer named Valery Martinov. He'd been called back to Moscow after a stint in the Washington embassy posing as a cultural attaché. Martinov also had a sideline, spying for the United States. 2 months later, Sergei Motorin, another young KGB officer who'd been recruited by the CIA, was unexpectedly called home to Moscow. Then from London, yet another double agent was suddenly ordered home to Russia. The CIA was concerned. Why were so many prized Soviet spies being recalled? No one in the CIA imagined that the answer was in their own ranks. By the end of 1985, every one of the double agents fingered by Ames had been recalled to Moscow, though even they still didn't know why. Some continued to work for the CIA. One, Sergei Motorin, went to a dead drop scheduled by his CIA handlers and right into a KGB trap. KGB officer Yuri Shvets later learned of his colleague's fate.
Motorin was supposed to unload a dead drop in a Moscow cemetery. The KGB surveillance was waiting on this dead drop site for 3 days in a row, day and night. They didn't know who would come. Motorin was caught.
After the KGB arrested Motorin, they threw him into the basement prison of their headquarters, the infamous Lubyanka. For the KGB, Aldrich Ames was both good news and bad news.
I think some wish they would never have a man like Rick Ames. Because to find out that the establishment, Soviet intelligence establishment, was infested with CIA moles was the greatest scandals of all, and Khrushchev barely survived.
Vladimir Khrushchev, the KGB chief, didn't want the traitors to disappear all at once. That might endanger his prize spy, Aldrich Ames, by tipping off the CIA that there must be a mole in their ranks.
Потому что без этого просто было невозможно работать. И, конечно, главное при этом всегда оставалось...
But President Mikhail Gorbachev and the Politburo ruled no delay. The spies must die.
The guys were betrayed by Ames. This is how they died. They take him into the dark room, and then one shot in the head of the at the back of the head, and he's dead.
We had lost a passel of agents. Bam, bam, kind of like 10 little Indians falling off. And so we knew we had a real problem. So we went to Casey, said we got trouble.
CIA Director Casey ordered an immediate investigation and named Officer Gene Vertifay to head it up. The agency had to face the possibility of a traitor in its ranks. It had never happened before, and no one wanted to believe it ever could. The investigators searched instead for communications breakdowns, broken codes, bugged embassies, wiretapped phones. As Vertifay's investigation got underway, word spread through the Soviet division of Motorin's fate.
One day I ran into Gene Vertifay in the hall, and Gene told me right there, she said they just executed him. He was arrested and executed. You know, she was upset. She'd long been involved with that case. She was upset, and I was shocked. I was upset. And of course, I said the necessary things to her.
10 Soviet spies were executed, while the man who betrayed them coolly walked the halls of the CIA. The initial investigation didn't find any communications problems. The agency scheduled all Soviet division personnel to take polygraphs, lie detector tests. Ames asked his KGB handlers to coach him on how to trip up the machine. Their advice? Stay calm.
The first thing I said to myself was, this is it. But the more I thought about it, it occurred to me that the KGB is going to give me the best they've got. You know, they aren't going to hold back any neat tricks back because they're not worth giving to me. They're going to give me the best they've got.
The KGB's simple advice worked. The polygraph operator judged Ames's answers to be bright and direct.
I think Ames by that time was a practiced liar. I think he could control his emotions very well.
I ran into Rick Ames at CIA headquarters, and we sat down and talked a lot. There was not one thing that I could detect in him personally that would have told me something's changed about Rick. He was clever, he was cool.
Jack Platt didn't suspect Ames, but he was growing uneasy about the CIA's losses in Moscow. He saw what had happened when he tried to recruit a rising young KGB officer, Gennady Vasilenko.
We were introduced by a mutual friend and sort of eyed each other the way dogs do when they first meet, circling around the table.
Of course, I didn't know he's a CIA guy, or I was suspecting that something's fishy going around, but that's my job. I was ready for that.
Both officers played the game, each hoping to recruit the other. Then Vasilenko dropped from sight. The KGB had panicked after Ames exposed all the traitors in their midst. Suspicious of Vasilenko's contact with Platt, they threw him in prison.
They don't trust me, they don't believe me. And how you could work like for the service, for the government, you're trying to do your best, maybe sometimes the wrong way, but you're trying. And they think you're a traitor.
The disappearance of his potential recruit, plus the loss of the CIA's double agents, began to add up.
Please, I don't claim to be, I'm the super glorious guy that nobody ever listened to. But you have to put two and two together and say, no counterintelligence organization gets that lucky, historically, without having a guy on the inside. I have no idea who it is, but they got somebody. And if we don't start looking for him, we're just crazy.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
But a political crisis erupted that derailed the investigation. The Iran-Contra scandal sent the agency running for cover. Director Casey was in serious trouble, and the last thing the CIA needed was the further humiliation of uncovering a mole in its headquarters. In May 1987, William Casey died. His successor, William Webster, was not even informed about the loss of the Soviet agents.
The disaster that occurred to Soviet operations went largely unnoticed by the outside world. It just sort of fell off the back of the stove for many years.
With the heat off and the KGB money rolling in, Ames could indulge. He bought a new Jaguar, designer clothing, jewelry for his new wife Rosario, and a $500,000 house in the suburbs, which he paid for in cash.
I cannot imagine that somebody didn't start wondering, how could he possibly do that? And then take it very seriously. And they didn't. I guess they didn't. I'm just every time I think about it, it gets a little more mind-boggling.
The CIA ignored other clues that something was amiss with Ames. On assignment in Rome, Ames was picked up drunk in the streets by the Italian police.
I know 3 women reported him to the chief of station. He was their supervisor. He was drunk all the time, and they didn't pay attention.
His drinking took a toll on his work for the KGB as well. Once he became so confused about where to meet his KGB handler that he flew to Zurich instead of Vienna.
Well, I was never a big steady drinker. I mean, all I know was that certainly I had trouble controlling my drinking at various times and over a long period of time. What it really all comes down to, I don't know.
As Ames was sleeping off his liquid lunches, the ground was shifting under his feet. The Soviet division, now run by Milt Bearden, was re-energized by the changes rocking Eastern Europe.
We are rolling. We're working. The Soviets have left Afghanistan. The Berlin Wall has fallen. The Czechs have gone. By 1990, the Warsaw Pact slips beneath the waves. It's over.
The Soviet Union was self-destructing. KGB chief Khrushchev, the spymaster Ames trusted to protect him, was struggling for survival. On August 18, 1991, he led a coup to overthrow Gorbachev.
То первым, кто учинил заговор против государства союзного, это был Горбачев.
The coup collapsed. Muscovites stormed Lubyanka, chanting death to the KGB. Khrushchev was thrown in prison. Soon, the Soviet Union was no more.
I was overjoyed at the failure of the coup. This, of course, it was a matter of some apprehension for my own personal security.
Ames now found himself in the unusual position of being a spy without a spy master. He didn't have a country to work for, but that didn't stop him. Instead, he started selling secrets to the new Russian government. After 6 years, the CIA still did not know for certain they had a mole. The possibility conjured up so many ghosts, from the excesses of Angleton to the excuses of the last 6 years, that the agency was incapable of investigating itself. Finally, in 1991, the CIA called in its arch-rival, the FBI. The FBI drew up lists of likely suspects. Aldrich Ames was on every list. The FBI trailed Ames, put surveillance on his home, tapped his phone, checked his finances, sifted his garbage. The circumstantial evidence that Ames was a spy was overwhelming.
By that time, I was in a pretty advanced state of denial, which involved denying to myself that there was any tangible threat to my discovery. I was just denying that to myself across the board.
February 21st, 1994. Aldrich Ames was scheduled to fly to Moscow the next day. After a 3-year investigation, the FBI was not about to risk a defection. That morning, as Ames was driving to Langley, 8 FBI agents stopped him and pulled him from his car. He was told he was under arrest for espionage. His response? You must have the wrong man. After $2 million, 10 lives, 3 presidents, 4 CIA directors, the end of the Cold War, and many, many stiff drinks, Aldrich Ames still couldn't face what he had done.
One thing I worried about and I wondered about, why didn't I wake up at night? Sometimes, not so much fearing that I would be caught. Why didn't I wake up at night feeling as guilty as I thought I should about what happened to some of those men? And I don't know what the answer is.
The Ames and Angleton stories bookend the Great Spy War, the obsessive mole hunter and the mercenary mole. Both men were products of the secrecy and deceit that come with the business of espionage. Both damaged the CIA for years.
I believe that James Angleton created a backlash, such an anti-counterintelligence atmosphere inside the agency, that what you end up with is no capability as far as I'm concerned.
He did a lot of things he shouldn't have done, but basically I think Jim was right. As a matter of fact, during his period of 20 years as the head of counterintelligence, we never had an Ames case, at least not that we know of.
Aldrich Ames is now in federal prison for the rest of his life.
What I sold to the KGB and the Russians didn't make a damn bit of difference to anybody, except in the human terms, where it made a great deal of difference. And that tells you something about what's really at stake. It tells you that espionage really is not very important when you come right down to it. When you look at the record, 40, 50 years of spy wars, and you say, well, what have we got here? And it's pretty much garbage.
Aldrich Ames compromised hundreds of CIA operations and scores of officers. His betrayal was a severe blow to agency morale and to its already beleaguered image.
The only thing I'd like is 5 minutes alone in a room with Rick Ames. Anyone who has been involved in a career of espionage must understand that throughout history, there have been double agents. There have been betrayers. There will always be a Benedict Arnold somewhere.
In a moment, you will hear about the arrest of Jim Nicholson, a 16-year career CIA Director of Operations employee on charges of committing espionage for Russia.
Only weeks after Ames was caught, a higher-ranking CIA officer allegedly followed his example and started selling secrets to the Russians. Harold Nicholson stands accused of betraying the agency for money like Ames. Unlike Ames, he was caught in 2 years rather than 9.
Thus far, we have no information that any CIA assets were killed as a result of Nicholson's spying. It seems unlikely that the damage he caused in any way approaches that done by Ames.
The spy wars of the Cold War have outlasted the Cold War itself. But the stakes have changed. It is no longer a great game of life and death. Despite Ames, the CIA won the spy war with the KGB, but his betrayal deeply scarred the Brotherhood's legacy.
I think that the Aldrich Ames case will be the point in time that one can always refer back to. That was the beginning of the end, or the end of the clandestine services, the DO, as it was constituted for close to 50 years.
In the lobby of CIA headquarters, there is an inscription from the Bible. "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The goal of espionage is to uncover the truth. But in the wilderness of mirrors that is the Central Intelligence Agency, the truth can be hard to find.